I've been asked to come and speak to you all today about understanding and handling the pressures our adolescents face. This is becoming more and more of an issue. So this can really be applied to parents, but also can be applied to all of you as you work with your students. And I'm mostly focusing on adolescents, but you can go a little bit younger and apply some of that to younger kids as well. So we all know this verse from Jeremiah, that we all know that the Lord has plans for us to prosper and for to have a hope and to have a future. But we have to help our children reach that point. So we want to help our kids reach God's plan by understanding that our children have stressors. They may be a little bit different than the adult stressors, but they still have stressors. They have pressures that they face on a daily basis, not just maybe at church, but also at school, maybe even at home. We'll talk about each of those areas little by little. We also have to understand that we are a good place to guide our children towards God's will, towards God's plan for them, and we're in a really unique position to do that, even different than parents, because we're providing knowledge about God's will and information about God and our values and our church and things like that. We also want to help them to understand a way to balance stress with coping mechanisms. Stress obviously exists, but we also want to balance that with coping mechanisms. And we want them to have a healthy way to express their emotions. We want to give them roots and wings, and I'll talk about more of each of these in detail. And then encouraging a relationship with God to know His will. So I sent out a handout in the email, and if you didn't get it, I think Sam is going to forward it to everybody again. But basically, it just was to kind of stimulate your thinking a little bit about pressures. So there's a myth out there that children are sometimes too young to experience pressure. And while they're young, their pressures may be different than our adult pressures, but they still experience stress and pressure. So saying that they're too young is really a myth. Also, we may think of a myth that says that children that have a lack of faith are the ones that are experiencing stressors. That's not true either, because I'll talk about this more in detail in a minute. But David the prophet talked about anxieties, Solomon talked about anxieties, and even Jesus himself said the very hairs of your head are numbered, et cetera, so that we shouldn't worry. So saying that we lack faith is not a good thing either. We may say that it may be as a result of bad parenting, and that's not true either, because even if a parent is good or bad, there's still going to be stressors. Our job as servants and our job as parents is to help them work out those stressors through problem solving and other methods I'll talk about as we go through this. We also may think that childhood stresses will go away very easily. If we don't talk about it, it'll just go away on its own. We can just brush it under the rug and it'll be okay. Or everybody experiences stresses, so why should I pay attention to this? And those are all myths as well. Again, our job is to be supportive and encouraging and empathic and help them to really figure out a way to cope with it. Not just, we're not going to talk about it and it's going to be okay. So those are all things to consider as well. So what kinds of things cause stress? We're going to talk about these in more detail as well, but it could be anything from being overworked, having poor relationships, a lot of relationships around them where people are fighting, they're not communicating well. It could be financial issues, or it could be stuff that's in the environment. That's really causing them a lot of stress. Anything from traffic to their living environments, anything in the environment. There's two kinds of stresses. The first kind is eustress. This is actually comes from things that are good. Okay, not every stress comes from things that are bad. So good stress is you're planning a vacation and you're busy organizing everything and packing and finishing up your workload. And so you're really stressed even though something good is about to happen, which is a vacation. People get stressed before weddings, before a baby's born, after a baby's born. So even from really good events, people can become stressed. And there's also the stress that we know about that comes from bad things, being lacking a promotion, losing a job, an illness of some sort. So there's stress that can come from. As I said earlier, there's stress that's been discussed in the Bible. So it's been discussed in the Bible as fear and worry. The word fear has been listed at least 365 times, so once at least for every day of the year. But we know that God is there for us in our stress. We know that He is in control. We know that He is with us today and tomorrow and always, so we shouldn't worry. And that love casts out fear. This is what I want to focus on today, that love casts out fear. If we love our students, we really show them God's will, and we really train them in the way that God wants them to be trained, then that casts out fear, that casts out anxiety. And I've talked about this a little bit. David the prophet talked about the multitudes of anxieties within him, but that God comforts his soul. Solomon the prophet, again, very similar. Anxiety in his heart causes man great depression, but the good word makes him. Again, we've said Jesus also talks about it, that that we shouldn't be afraid of those that kill the body. We're more valuable than sparrows. The very hairs of our head are numbered. So stress is any way that the body responds to any outside or environmental demand. And for our kids, as you can see in this picture, there's lots of stresses on them, from exams to getting a job to learning to be responsible. And they can either adjust in a really good way, or they cannot adjust in a good way. And then they wouldn't be able to respond to the demands around them in a very good way. So now I want to get into more detail about what actually causes their stress. So the things that cause their stress is being overly ambitious. We live in a very competitive world nowadays. Hectic schedules, lots to do, going to sports practices, coming to church, gathering with friends, going to school. If they're running late, that may cause stresses. If they are absorbing financial issues from their parents, that may cause stress. Too many responsibilities, not enough time to complete them. Again, things in the environment like technology and traffic. Other things like not spending enough time with God. And by time with God, I don't mean just time in church, but actually time with God, quiet time where they can shut out all the noise in the world, focus on what they need to focus on. Not spending enough time with family or friends or people that are really there for them can cause stress. Not enough downtime or vacation can cause stress. And also if they're absorbing marital difficulties from their parents, that can cause a lot of stress. As we move into adolescence, the struggles become even more confusing when their identity gets a little bit questioned and jumbled, and they get confused about who they are and what their place is in the world. There's lots of changes that are happening during adolescence, lots of physical and biological, and I'll talk more about the changes. And they're also trying to explore and at the same time kind of remove themselves away from their parents little by little. They're learning adults. And for adolescents in particular, it's like a storm and a stress period. G. Stanley Hall, one of the first psychologists in the United States, actually discussed this term as storms and stresses. So just like a storm comes in very strong, very powerful, and may leave a lot of destruction in its path, similar, our teenager comes in very powerful, very strong, and there's a lot of conflict that comes with parenting, with maybe even the servants, because they're trying to show their independence from the parents and from the servants. There's a lot of struggles because of mood disruptions that may occur due to biological and hormonal changes. And then they may also get involved in some risky behavior because they're trying to fit in. All these things, again, cause lots of stress. And so, of course, this isn't happening to every single person that you interact with and that you talk with. And it varies based on individual differences in the person's culture and how long they've been in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. And so not every child experiences it at the same level, but they experience it at least a little bit, maybe on a transient level. And if they're going to experience these types of stressors, they're going to experiencing it during adolescence more than any other time, because adolescence is a very fast, rapid growth period, just like toddlers. So they're going through an identity crisis, like I said a moment ago. And this word used to be used just for people coming back from combat, people coming back from wars and from fighting and things like that. But now it's been used more with adolescents because of the differences, things that are changing biologically, like I said. As puberty hits, there's a lot of hormonal changes that are happening. Their brain is changing, their chemistry is changing. Also due to cognitive changes. They used to think in much more black and white terms. Now they're thinking a lot more hypothetically and a lot more philosophically than they ever did before. They can pick up on hypocrisy and mixed messages a lot better than they used to, and that's confusing. Also, in terms of social development, they're starting to form an identity in terms of their friends. Who are their friends? Who do they value? Do they have similar values as me? Do they believe in what I believe in? And what is my place in this group? And there's a lot of in and out group behavior, so they may feel they don't fit in. Also, depending on how rapidly their body's developing, they may feel awkward in front of their peers and in front of other teens who are developing differently. Their moral development is also changing in the sense that when they were young and toddlers, they used to just do what mom and dad said simply because mom and dad made the rules. However, as they get older, they're learning more and more moral development to do things because it's right versus wrong. So I shouldn't hit somebody or hurt somebody because it's right versus wrong, not just because mom and dad made a rule about it or my teacher made a rule about it. So as you can see, there's a lot of change happening all at the same time. In addition to all of that, they're living in a very fast-paced world. There's a lot of difficult news in the world all the time. You hear about planes crashing as recently as yesterday, to war, to violence, and they're getting all of these messages all at the same time. They can make a connection with anybody in the world at any time, even when we're not aware, through Facebook, through all these social media sites. And they may get conflicting messages from the media, from church, from their parents, from their teachers at school, different from their teachers here at Sunday school. So they're getting a lot of different messages. They're trying to fit in. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to make life-altering decisions about careers and school and all of these things. And so they're somewhat a child, but they're somewhat an adult at the same time. Also, some more pressures that they face today is homework issues. Some people are better able to complete homework and able to grasp material than other people. Parents' expectations may be a little bit too high, that they want them to be perfect at everything. We also know that competition is increasing, and competition makes things a little bit more difficult too. They're trying to balance their social life with their church life, with their friends' life, and trying to fit in all these things. Deadlines we talked about, lack of time. Sports, they may be involved with sports, another added thing that they have to worry about. And they also may have acculturation issues if they're coming to this country new and they're not learning how to deal with the culture yet. And this may come in the form of bullying as well. So let me talk about the acculturation piece a little bit more before we move forward, because I know we have a lot of newcomers that are coming in. We have to be aware that they have differences, obviously. And before somebody moves from one country to another, even from one state to another, they're not really aware of how much culture affects their everyday behaviors. Okay, they're not really aware of that. It's kind of just something you do, but you're not really aware of how it affects your behaviors. So when you move to a new country and you're involved with a new group of people, or you move to a new state and you're involved with a new group of people, you've got a lot of coping to do because now you're doing things differently than the way that you used to. And you start realizing that people may think differently, people may interpret things differently, and they may even act differently. So there's a lot of changes that are happening as a result of that. And it may not necessarily align with how you used to do things. And based on how your personality is, that may change how you do things, how quickly and how rapidly you adjust to this new environment. So things that were once invisible to you because you just did them every day the same way, now you're starting to do them a little bit differently, and you're starting to see things a little bit differently as well. So as people adjust to their move, they start realizing that the culture that they're now in is different than the culture that they were once in before, and that these differences could be an infinite number of differences, not just from how people speak, their dialect, how rapidly they speak, how slow they speak, how close they speak to you in proximity. All this can lead to culture shock, feeling uncomfortable, physical signs of stress, maybe even stop coming to church because they don't feel comfortable. And those are the times I would suggest that we reach out and explain that this is, part of the process and that you're there for them. But lots of emotions can come out of something like that. We also want to help them find a different way to balance their home culture, what they came with their new culture where they're living. And that's a very difficult thing to do, but it takes time, it takes support, it takes encouragement, and finding the good parts of their personality that can help them to do these changes and boost those changes up. We want to help them to do these things because it helps people to meet goals. It helps people to accomplish the work that they're involved in, helps them to make friends, helps them to learn new things, helps them to function day to day, and in the end, it helps them to aid other people as well. So if we help support and encourage those times, that can really help people in the long run. The next big area I want to cover is bullying. And bullying is any time that there is a repeated exposure over and over again from one person who is in power to another person who is in less power. And the key points here is it's intentional. It's not just, horsing around or just having fun, but it's intentionally meant to cause pain or meant to cause harm. It has to do with something that's repeated and is an imbalance of power. So anytime you have those three ingredients, you really have a bully. Okay? And so the bullying can be a physical experience, and I'll talk more about each one of these. A bigger person and a smaller person, they could bully them. It could be someone who's stronger, someone who's older and someone who's younger, someone who's stronger, someone who's weaker. Social status, so someone's a really big leader, another person's a follower. So whenever there's a balance, a lack of balance of power, these things can happen. There's different types of bullying. Physical is the one that you see right in front of you, probably the easiest to figure out that you have an issue there because it's kicking, hitting, pushing, knocking somebody down. Those are the types of bullying that you may see. It also may be verbal. This one may not be as hard to see either. It may be easier to see this one. Somebody calling somebody names, insulting them, making jokes about them that are inappropriate. Those kinds of things are verbal bullying. And then the last two are a little bit harder to detect. So relational or psychological bullying is more of this in-group, out-group type of bullying, where you exclude somebody from your group, you talk about somebody behind their back, you make them feel not included. All these things can create deep scars in somebody that last for a very, very long time. And then we have cyberbullying, of course, that happens, maybe you don't even see it here at church, it happens on Facebook, it happens on social media, it happens on a computer, on a text message, all hours of the day, even into the night, and we don't even see that that's happening. But it's the same type of thing. Rumors, excluding somebody, not using the social media to bully somebody. Risk factors for bullying are people that are involved in families that lack warmth. So if you see families that lack warmth, those kids may be a target of bullying. Parents that are overly permissive, letting them do whatever they want at any time, that may create some bullying because they feel entitled to do whatever they want. Overly harsh parents can also create kids that have a lot of bullying issues. And if they're being modeled that behavior either from their peers in church or from school, that may result in some bullying as well. And also if they live in an atmosphere where there's no consequences, that can create some issues as well. So it's something that we really have to be aware of. And boys and girls experience these things differently. So boys will be more of the physically aggressive type of bullying, whereas girls are more of they're more related to verbal type things. So they're going to deal with bullying more in terms of their friendships, excluding people from their groups, spreading rumors, talking negatively about somebody, staring, leaving hurtful messages, etc. So the boys are more likely to be the aggressive type of bullying. The girls are more likely that relational or psychological bullying. And just to show you how prevalent some of this is, how much we have this as an issue, a study conducted in 2006, so about 7 years ago or so, this is probably even more of an issue now, but they had seen that bullying had increased by 50% since the 5 years before that. So from 01 to 06, it increased by about 50%. They surveyed 10 to 17-year-old youth and found that bullying had gone up from 6% to 9%. 50% of people felt distressed by it, 38% felt afraid, 32% felt that they were attacked or bullied by more than one person. But the good news of all this is that 68% of them reported it. So if they really trust you, they will come and report to you. If they don't feel that there's going to be any consequences from reporting it, they will come and report it to you. Another study done with 11 to 15-year-olds in Canada found that, looked at cyberbullying in particular, and found that 35% sent or received some sort of inappropriate text message or email. So again, something that we may not even know about. 25% had somebody tarnish their reputation via some social media or cyberbullying, and 25% posted something that was insensitive about somebody else, and 25% were cyberbullied because they either cyberbullied somebody else because they either didn't like that person, or they were upset by them, or they felt they were bullied first, and this was the only problem. I said about 68% do report it, but there's a percentage of people, about 25%, that do not report it. And so this is the group that we really have to be concerned with. They're either afraid that there's going to be some retribution of some sort, that the bullying will not stop, even if I talk about it to my teacher, to my parents, that some sort of consequence, like not talking to my friends or not being allowed to go online, feelings of shame, all these things prevent people from talking to somebody about it. There's also stress that can come from the parents we've talked about. Maybe the parents lack understanding of their children. Maybe they lack communication with their children. Maybe they demand perfection. Maybe there's financial issues that we should be aware of that are causing them to be really stressed out. Marital difficulties at home. Stress that's in the parents' life that they're now putting onto the kids. And also we talked about acculturation differences a little while ago. So maybe the parents are not as acculturated, but the kids are, and that can create some sort of clash as well. So how can we tell if there is stress in their lives? You could tell from bodily stress signs, from feeling signs, from thinking signs, and from behavioral signs. And this is a nice little chart that shows you all of those things. From the body perspective, they may have frequent headaches or frequent illnesses that they don't want to come to church or go to school or whatever they need to do. They may be tired all the time. From an emotional perspective, they may lack confidence. They don't care about anything. That's called apathy. They may be irritable all the time or depressed all the time. In terms of their thinking signs of stress, they may be worrying a lot. Their thinking may not be very clear. They make hasty decisions. They may be negative. And in terms of their behavior, they may be accident prone. They may lose their appetite, or they may, have really bad eating habits and drinking habits, restlessness, lack of sleep, etc., things like that. Also, they may be holding in problems more, and their emotions, they may hold it in more. They may also act out a lot. They may have decreases in their self-confidence or their self-esteem. And they may have an increase in sadness and other emotions that are related to sadness. So how can we help? I really like to use this quote a lot because I think it can help with a lot of parenting and both our service as well. But our purpose is to give roots, to really ingrain them in our values and in our belief systems and all that, but at the same time prepare them by giving them wings. Give them lots of self-confidence, give them lots of things so that they can balance the roots and the wings as well. So like we said before, we have to balance their stresses with our coping mechanisms. And the first step to doing this is to really listen. To really, really listen, not just hear the words that are coming out of their mouth, but also to see how they're reacting to situations that are around them, how they're interacting with other people, and be a place where they can come and speak and let out what they're feeling. So they have to be able to reveal something. You have to be able to listen, and understanding falls somewhere in between those two things. We want to help them find balance in many areas of their life, from their family to what they do at work or at school, to leisure activities, putting God always in the center. And we have to also provide them with messages of hope and messages that things change and things do get better, but we're here to support you during those difficult times. When we help people to find balance, we have to help them to find time to spend with God, not just the messages that we give them in Sunday school, but also helping them to find time to shut out that noise and to be quiet and to learn what's beneficial for them. Prioritize which stressors are the most stressful. You work with those first, and then you go into ones that are not as stressful. Teaching them to live a healthy lifestyle, to evaluate which stressors are most important to deal with, and helping them to learn to communicate with you as a servant, with their peers that are around them, and to communicate with other people effectively. We also want to learn to communicate not just by the words that we say, but by our body language, You can't say one thing and then your body language says another, or your emotions say another, or it's okay, I'm just going to not worry about it because my words say that I'm supportive, but my actions do not. So communication helps us to see other people's perspectives. It helps us to see other people's thoughts, to help us see other people's feelings, their opinions, what their goals are. And so communication is really like a window. If we leave the window dirty or closed, we won't be able to feel what that other person feels. We won't be able to communicate with them very well. So we have to open the window a little bit and make sure that we're communicating with them in a very good way. Some of the things you want to communicate is for them to be proud of who they are, even if they're going through a stressful time, that everybody has strengths. We have to focus on what those strengths are. And even for the quiet ones or the ones that are not really involved in the class, find a way to engage them, find a way to support their strengths, and use those strengths to help them combat their stress. Give them plenty of time when they want to talk about something because they may not know how to talk about it right away. Make sure you're encouraging that they exercise, eat right, sleep right, those kinds of things as well. Discuss their problems openly with their family members as well. You can gain a lot of information from the family if you start to do those things. If you're starting to get stressed out about it, take a time out, go away for a little bit, take a deep breath, and then come back and deal with the issue. And also when I talk to parents, I usually use this chart because this is the proper way to engage in discipline. The best way to do it is this authoritative, the white one on the top, authoritative discipline, which is giving a lot of rules and a lot of love at the same time. If you don't give enough rules, but you give a lot of love and everything is just loose and they can do whatever they want, they won't be able to function because they don't have enough rules. If you're giving them too much rules and not enough love, that's more like a dictatorship, and they don't feel like they have any part in the class and any part in what is happening to them. And then if you don't pay attention to them at all, and you're neglectful, you don't give them any rules or any love, that's a problem as well. So you want to do the top left corner. Authoritative is best because it gives you a lot of time to communicate with that person. It fosters a lot of dialogue. It engages them in a conversation. For parents, parents that do this tend to be more warm and attentive and responsive. Same with servants. You also want to allow the children to explore their environments and have their own autonomy and their own freedom, but at the same time, you're giving them rules and encourage them along the way. You want to give them unconditional love, but yet be firm. So if they're breaking the rules, yes, there has to be consequences, but you're still loving them at the same time. You're not withdrawing love. You're not taking them out of the class and embarrassing them or doing those kinds of things. So there has to be some mutual respect. And children that experience that tend to be more successful, tend to be more happy and generous and helpful of other people as well. So some important servant behaviors that you want to do is you want to be warm and genuine, because again, by the time they're teenagers, they can pick up on inconsistencies and can pick up on some hypocrisy. So you want to be warm and genuine and real and empathic. And empathic means that you put yourself in their shoes. We understand that we're older than them and probably wiser, hopefully wiser, but we also want to put ourselves in their shoes to see what they're really feeling and seeing it from their perspective. So our perspective may be different, but we have to look at it from their perspective. That's the only way to communicate to them that's gonna fit and that's gonna work. We also want to be consistent in the way that we deal with them. If we give one message today and then a different message next week and a different message the week after that, that inconsistency and that lack of consistency does not help teach them anything. And most importantly, we want to be patient. Christ is patient with us always, no matter what we do, so we have to be patient with them. Also, before a problem occurs in the class, you want to train them by example, by your behavior, by how you interact, by how you deal with stress. If a problem is occurring at that time, then we train them by love, by loving them unconditionally, but being firm, like I just said. And then after a problem occurs, by hope, so that things are going to change, that they're not always going to be this tough, that life changes and the page turns and everything will be okay. When we ask them questions and we're trying to communicate with them, we want to ask non-threatening questions. If we're asking threatening questions, then we're not helping them along. They're going to feel like they're being judged. If you ask more open-ended questions, that helps as well. So instead of saying, how are you today, just yes or no questions, you want to ask questions that are more open so that they can provide more information about how they're feeling. You want to listen more than you speak. Words like always and never should be kind of removed from your vocabulary. If you say you always are the one that acts out in class, okay, that kind of puts them on the spot, makes them feel defensive, and they probably are not the only ones that act out. That's probably part of the childhood and all of that. So try to remove words like always and never. You want to kind of reflect their mood unless it's a mood of anger, but if they're sad, again, try to put yourself in their shoes and see what they're feeling. And make your statements like quick and impactful, because their attention spans may be a little bit short. You also want to do some of these things before a problem occurs. So anticipate when they're going to need help. Anticipate when they are stressed out, and develop that relationship before the problem even occurs. Ask them lots of direct questions, but again, they're non-threatening questions. They don't want to feel like they're judged. And give them advice even if they don't necessarily want the advice, because you're trying to help them, you're trying to guide them. But again, you're doing it in a non-judgmental way. Then physically assist them with the problem. Sit down, work together, some problem-solving things that you can work on. Let's solve this problem by doing A, B, C, and D. And then the most important thing is to follow up. A lot of times as teachers, we don't have time to follow up, so we don't. We just, we think that we solved the problem in the class, and that's it. So we really need to solve with them and then follow up and arrange for a follow-up so you can see if this helped, what you can do to adjust so that you can help them again if they need it. Listening is really, really important because it uncovers a lot of hidden feelings, okay? More than if you just talk a lot. When you listen, you uncover a lot of feelings. And it takes the fear away from that feeling because you're listening and you're not judging. You're listening and you're not necessarily jumping in with advice right away. You're helping the adolescent to hear their own problems. Sometimes when they hear it, it doesn't seem as bad or it doesn't seem as big, or they start to formulate ideas about how to solve it. So listening is really important for that as well. And it helps you to learn more about the adolescent at the same time while you're working with them. The two mistakes that you can do when you're listening is to kind of drift off, think about dinner, think about your vacation that's coming up next week, think about what you're going to do after you leave church. So drifting off is not good. You really have to intently listen. If you're only listening for the obvious, that they're going to say they made a mistake or they fell apart or whatever it is, then that's not good either. You want to ask questions if you're not clear, but don't drift off and don't just assume for what you think you're going to hear. Advice falls on deaf ears when it's self-centered, when you're afraid that they're going to embarrass you, so you make it about them. If you make them feel worse about their mistake and about their problem, usually if they're coming to tell you, that's the point where they're starting to feel some guilt anyway. So to guilt them even more is not a good thing. You may be able to tell them right from wrong, but not make them feel worse about the situation. The advice may be threatening. If you say, don't hang out with these group of friends because I don't think that this is a good group for you to hang out with. For them to hear that and they love these friends, even though they may be not good friends or not a good influence, they're going to lose something. So you have to, again, come at it from their perspective. If I tell them not to hang out with this group, that means that's going to hurt them because now they're feeling that they're going to lose this group of friends. So it may be too costly or too threatening for them to do those things. So give your message of what your values are, but also understanding that this is a big thing for them if they're going to lose a group of friends. So we have to listen, be non-judgmental, give them some freedom, but also guide them along the same way. A lot of people say, I told you so, whenever somebody asks a question, sit down, I told you so. Try to explain it a little bit more, as opposed to just saying, I told you so. And be consistent, and if there's several of you in that classroom, be united. So be united with all the other teachers. It's good to have a group of teachers meet that are united as well. We can also help the kids by being a role model. And the first step of this, so to kind of break this down a little bit, is to figure out where the problem really exists. Pinpoint the severity. In what area are they the most weak, or they're struggling with the most? We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. Stop and think about the problem. Stop and think, so this helps them to not be so impulsive and to jump into a decision without knowing all of the consequences involved. Decide on a goal that you want to help them reach, and then figure out a way to kind of reach that goal in step-by-steps. Choose a solution. Once you've figured out what all the consequences are and you've listed a bunch of ways to solve the problem, choose a solution, then implement the solution, and then again, as I said a few minutes ago, follow up. It's very important to follow up because they may not understand what to do once they've gotten to meeting that goal. If they're feeling inferior, and by teenagers, they feel inferior in something, either their body image, or they're not good at math, or they're not good at sports, or whatever it may be, help them to develop positive statements about themselves based on real talent, not just fluff, because again, you have to be genuine. They're going to figure out if you're not genuine. So figure out what really they're good at, use positive statements to help them base how to improve their issues. If they have unrealistic standards, everybody's looking at me, I'm going to fall apart if I do this, then set reachable goals, because that will make them feel not so inferior. Sometimes, again, they have that negative talk. We should try to combat that a little bit as well. Teach them problem-solving skills. Figure out where the inferiority is specifically. Like I said, it could be body image issues, it could be some depression, it could be their parents, whatever. And figure out how to deal with that specific problem. The struggles usually occur when people are trying to be perfectionists, okay? Or if the people around them are being way too overprotective so that they can't figure things out on their own. If there's a lot of inconsistency, that creates problems. If we're modeling incorrectly, that creates problems. If people around them are physically influencing them, again, that peer pressure, that can create problems. Or if their thinking is off. Like I said, people think that everybody's looking at me, I'm no good at this. This faulty thinking can create a lot of problems as well. And so during service, like I said, the problems occur when we're communicating poorly, when we're not respecting each other, when we're not changing as the child grows. So as the child grows, their mind changes, their body changes. We have to change how we deal with them as they grow as well. We have to be patient and comforting, not expect perfection, but also give them goals to reach so that they feel that they're accomplishing something. If we're rejecting and neglecting kids, especially we're just either focusing on the leaders or the troublemakers, that's a problem. If we're overindulgent, giving them whatever they want, and we're over permissive or too strict on them, that's a problem. Those things create rebellion and feelings of self-worth issues. So as we get close here to the end, we want to be more interested and involved with our children. For example, if they're listening to a particular type of music, we may want to address things from their perspective. Again, it's more not just about music, but addressing things from their perspective and from seeing it from how they see it, looking at it through their eyes. And we want to give advice that is helpful, but can be seen from their perspective. So guide them, lead them, be the teacher, but also see it from their perspective. That is very, very important. Another really good thing that I tell people to do is find a scenario from your life where you struggled or you had an issue with something, and be personable with them to show them how you dealt with that problem. What was the problem? How did you generate solutions? What solutions did you come up with, and how did it feel afterwards after you came up with that solution? That helps to show them that you're human, that you're not just above this power, again, that you're more powerful than they are, but that you also have issues that you work through and that you deal with it. And the last couple slides is you want to help them name their emotions. There's 4 main emotions, and all other emotions fall somewhere in these categories. They're either happy or they're fearful or anxious, depressed or sad, or angry. And again, all other emotions fall in these categories. All emotions are an alarm system in our body that tells us that something is wrong. So don't turn off the emotions, but help them to deal with it. Help them to control the emotions, not the emotions control them. Okay? But it's very important to express emotions, and they usually mean that there's something wrong happening. And this sometimes I show to parents so that younger kids can pick the face that they feel. If we want to create a more resilient child, we want to teach them gratitude. Research has shown that kids that are more gracious, they feel more gratitude. They tend to, even in small things, I'm grateful today because I didn't get into a fight with my sister or with my neighbor or whatever. Even small gratitude like that makes people more resilient. If they can find good in everyday experiences, they tend to be more resilient. If they know what their strengths are, they tend to be more resilient. If they do random acts of kindness, people tend to be more resilient. Even opening the door for somebody, or somebody dropped something, they help them pick it up, or they pass out something in the class. And helping them to find what their unique meaning and their unique purpose is, that also helps people be more resilient. And our role as a servant is to provide hope and faith, but also lots of love. And we have a different perspective necessarily from what the parents see. We see it as something different than what the parents see at home. We want to deliver that God's love is unconditional, and that we see different sides of that child from the parents. But also, this place in church is a place of encouragement. Not just pick on some people and make those the teacher's pet and make those the best people in the class, but we're supposed to be across board encouraging to everybody, no matter what their background is, how long they've been in the U.S., what their parents, are like, those kinds of things. We want to be supportive and advocate for the parents, but also for the child, work together with the parents to come up with a plan, and also teaching them that any problem will pass. It does get better. If you're stressed out now, it does get better with time, and that with God, nothing shall be impossible. And because you have a lot on you, you need to be able to not be ashamed to get help either, okay? If you can't do it all by yourself, get together with other servants that can help you problem solve. If you need to talk to a psychologist and the issue is really severe, find a psychologist to speak with, or even helplines if issues are really, really severe. Most importantly, of course, to pray, but talk to somebody about your stress so that you don't bring that onto the kids as well. So finally, there's lots of ways to overcome stress, from stopping negative thoughts to time management, to relaxation methods, to reading a good book, whatever it may be. But what I'm trying to show with this slide is be creative. There's lots of different ways to overcome stress. It's not just sitting and talking with them or listening, but be creative. Take them out on a trip, take them out on a retreat, and find different ways to talk to them about dealing with their stress. Thank you. Yes, it's Habashi, or you.
One of the most important problems we face sometimes when kids come to deciding, my parent doesn't want me to go out, doesn't want me to sleep over, doesn't want me to go on day school, doesn't want me to do this or this or that. And I'm so mad that I can do that.
Okay.
So mad that I can do that, or just want to kill myself. How do you answer?
Again, I would talk with the parents. Yes. So the question is, the parents are being too restrictive and they feel that they don't have a lot of freedoms, and then it ends up with them saying something like, I just want to kill myself, right? Okay. So the first thing is you have to make sure that statement is not just said. If that statement is for real, you need to take action, okay? If you believe that there's really an intent to do harm, at that point you must break your confidentiality with that student and find a professional that will be able to help. There's suicide hotlines. I can give you the numbers that we can talk to. 1-800-SUICIDE is a 24/7 suicide hotline, or 1-800-273-TALK is a 24-hour, 24/7, 365 days a year hotlines that they can talk to and get immediate help. It's also something that you need to find a psychologist to help with. And maybe even take them to an emergency room if it's really, really urgent. If it's something that you're not sensing is urgent, but just is a conflict problem with the parents and the children, then you need to engage the parents at that time and talk to them about how to let go a little bit, but also give your values and your rules. Tightening too much, like I said in this presentation, is going to be an issue because they feel that they don't have enough autonomy or freedom to make their own decisions. So you have to keep repeating over and over again consistently what your expectations are and what the rules are, but also give a little bit of leeway. So no Facebook at 3 o'clock in the morning for a 15-year-old, for example. But there are some limits that you can communicate with your friends on the computer, those kinds of things, a couple hours a day or an hour a day or something like that. So we have to work with the parents to get them to communicate better to their kids, because tightening too much is not going to be helpful and loosening too much is not going to be helpful. But if it's really urgent, at that point we need to break confidentiality and get them help immediately, either with an ER or a psychologist or these hotlines.
That was a really good talk.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Question, you raised the topic about when kids are engaged with friends that aren't the best necessarily. And that you said that if you go up to the kid and say, hey, your friends aren't really great, you shouldn't hang out with them, you're really taking something away from them. How do you kind of combat that issue? Because I think it's something a lot of kids deal with, where their friends are not the best, or their friends are not the best, and they just don't have the wisdom to kind of realize that they're not the best. So you try to direct them to replace these friends with someone else. You know, because it kind of presents a problem. If you're going to have them replace these friends with another group of friends, you can't just make friends with them.
Right.
So how do you kind of deal with this issue?
Yeah, so it's really important. What do we do about our friendships? Yeah, what do we do when our children are involved with friends that are not really good friends? And that's a really good question, because it does come up a lot, like you're saying. So I think that we, as parents and as servants, need to involve them with people before the problem even starts, involve them with people that are similar in values, similar in belief systems. And this is why the church community is generally good for that, because they're generally, I mean, I'm not saying everybody, but generally they're around people that are similar to them in terms of values. Of course, they're going to go to school, and the people around them there may not have the same values and that kind of thing. Once the problem has already started, this is where you say, these people, I know that you would be losing something by losing this group of friends, but here's why I think that engaging with these people may be dangerous or not helpful to you or not beneficial to you. But I understand that losing this group of friends is painful and it hurts, and so you're on the same level. You're putting yourself and seeing it through their eyes, and really, again, you have to be genuine. You can't just say that and have it just be fluff. It has to be really genuine, and you really have to believe what you're saying. And at the same time, engage them with other people that they're going to be similar to, and find that they're similar in value, because they want to encourage one another. And it's really hard once you've engaged with somebody that's not good to come back from that and be the same person that you once were. So explaining some of those things, I think, is beneficial. And you also have to make it age appropriate. So a 5-year-old is not going to be like a 20-year-old or a 15-year-old or whatever. Does that help? It's hard. It's definitely not easy, but yes.
Question about how can we prevent kids from having multiple personalities? So in church they act a certain way, you know, that complies with the values of the church. But then they go to school and they see how people talk, you know, and the vocabulary they use and whatever, and then, you know, they want to fit in.
Right.
You know, so it's very hard, and they're obviously not there in all these situations. So how can you, as an outsider, you know, as a parent, help create those rules and hope for them to apply them in different
Yeah.
situations?
Yeah, so the question is that people compartmentalize and put themselves in different situations and act a little bit differently. That's a really tough one as well, because that takes lots of time and lots of practice. But if their self-esteem is really, really strong, and that's what we need to boost up, is they're making their self-esteem strong and finding what their strengths are, then they won't feel that they have to act differently from one scenario to the other. Because now I feel strong in who I am, and I know that what I'm doing is right, and I should be the leader, not just follow other people and try to be like them and talk a different way at school than I do at church than I do at home. So I would say building the self-esteem, and that takes years sometimes. It doesn't happen overnight. But if you boost that self-esteem and find out what their strengths are and use that to make them stronger so that they can influence others, not have others influence them, I think that will help tremendously. But that takes time. During the teenage years in particular, that's difficult. And we even say that the brain is developing all the way until the mid-20s, so they've got plenty of time to work with this issue. And if they fall down in parts of this, you know, to be accepting and to continue to teach them until they get it. But self-esteem, I think, is key. Yes.
I guess following up on that, I teach the preschool, and I think that maybe that's the appropriate time for us to start building rules. Because I think the kids, they do have rules and everything, but then they push the boundaries by the time to get to the teenagers.
Yes.
And sometimes I just want to know what to do with my kids at this age to prevent what I see right now in that teenage. The other thing is, I don't know how we can, I can do that with a half an hour to 45 minutes in the classroom, because I think we should have, or we need a recipe, exactly, is like, how, what is it your suggestions on how we should treat that, how we should develop that? Because they only with me for 45 minutes once a week. And then I see, at certain situations in the church, these teenagers, they do not respect anyone. They do not respect the church. I mean, if you're not there, if, for example, I am not there, or Santa is there, or Daniel is there, or Mona is there, doesn't matter. Even sometimes with their teachers, it's not really that big of a deal. They show the respect. And then you have, it's not exactly bullying, but you have some kids who are willing to do things, and then the others who are just being there to disrespect or not to do things, and get the weaker ones to be with them. And I don't know how to handle such. I got exposed to something, a situation, and it made me frustrated because they should respect where they are. That's first and foremost. And then, no. So what is it your suggestion on what to do now for me with my little kids? And for each, like, selection of each group now, to build on what we have, so we can prevent, make the whole class is one group, not be like, divided
Right.
in this group, and this group, and this group, and this group, and these things, I think was, all the stress.
Right. So how do we work with younger children so that by the time they get to teenagers and adults, it's never too early to start, and it's never too late to start either. So even if you're a teenager, you can still turn around some of this, but also know that they're developing still, and they, even whether they're preschoolers or all the way until they're teenagers, they're still developing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, like I said before, there has to be lots of rules presented with lots of love. So that has to be the case that I always say. So I would recommend that you create boundaries, and then they know what the consequences are going to be before they commit those actions. So I know that if I go out of this in my car and drive up this road at 50 miles an hour, the consequence is either I can get into an accident or get pulled over by the police. So there's a consequence that I know well before I do the action. Not just implement the rule now that you've seen the behavior, but try to create a list of rules with the consequences before they do it. So that way they know, if I do this, this is what's going to happen. And again, that stuff has to come from internal. That need to respect others has to come from internal. But we have to teach it as well, that respect is so important, and give that message over and over and over again until people accept it and learn it. Because you can't live in a world where you don't respect other people, right? So eventually there's going to be a consequence to that, whether it's at school, whether it's in church, whether it's at home, there's going to be a consequence to that they're going to face. So applying those rules before the problem occurs, that's what I said in this presentation, anticipate before the problem occurs what the problem is going to be, make a list of rules with the consequences, and then enforce it and change it as they grow. And as they get older, the consequences become different. They're not going to be the same as a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old. They're going to be a little bit different. So that's what I would say, repetition over and over again, it eventually will stick. And if they believe, again, with that self-esteem issue we talked about, really believing in themselves, they're not going to create problems to try to get attention. So they create problems to sometimes get attention, but if we really focus on them and their good qualities, and not just focus on when they do something bad, that helps tremendously as well. Focus on the good, not just when they're doing something bad. Yes.
من وجهة نظرهم عشان وجهة نظرهم ونسمعهم من وجهة نظرهم وبعدين نختلف من وجهة نظرهم دي غلط. احنا عايزين نوصل لهم مسج ان وجهة النظر بتاعتهم دي غلط. هم مش عايزين يسمعوا يعني.
Okay, so if their point of view is wrong and we're trying to explain it to them from our point of view, which is the adult, the more wise way, I guess. But what I'm saying from their point of view is their feelings. Yani if, like we were saying about the friends issue a minute ago when Bishoy was in here, the feeling is what's real to them. It's not, they could still be wrong in how they're approaching something. But the feeling is, I'm going to lose my friend. This is a big deal. So the feeling is, I'm sad. Acknowledge that feeling is that they're sad. But so you still want to put your point of view is that this friend is not necessarily a good friend. But I understand if you lose this friend, it's going to be very sad for you. It's going to be very hard for you. So that's what I'm saying, see it from their point of view. Oh, this could make you angry, or this could make you happy, or this could make you whatever. But you still want to give them your guidelines and your beliefs and your values. Does that help? But the feeling, you want to see it from their feeling, how they're feeling. Do you see what I'm saying?
How to convince them, this is what you meant.
Mm-hmm. How you convince them?
Convince them in my point now, this is good. So I how he or she will be not understand.
By explaining. You can't just say you can't be friends with this person's not a good influence, and that's it. Keep explaining what you see that's bad about this friendship, how it has changed their behavior. Maybe they got more in trouble in school after they became friends with this person. So you're going to get more detentions. Oh, you got more in trouble in the class. Oh, you're talking back more. I see these things happening since you became friends with this person. But I understand that you're feeling sad because you're going to lose this friendship.
How about him to overcome the sadness or that he is going to lose a friend?
How you help them over? How do you help them overcome the sadness? So,
We know he's gonna be sad anyway.
right. But we have to explain to them that you understand that they're going to be sad, that you're not just making rules to make rules.
Actually,
So-
sometimes they, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think in some situations they know that this friend is not good for them. But at the same time, they want to be with them because they are popular.
Yeah. And maybe it's the only person that accepts them.
Popular group.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem because at this age, even the ones who have the confidence, who has they show that they are the best and they are the leaders, they still have some of doubt.
Yes.
A lot of doubt.
Yes.
Because at this age group, they have tons of doubt.
Yes.
So they can show you they are leaders.
Yes.
But they are still doubtful.
I agree.
Who's gonna be? But I think that's a problem. They sometimes know that this person is bad for them, but they are still going with them, no matter what you say, no matter what you confess.
And this is where you repeating over and over again what your values are, what the church's values are, why you believe what you believe. It doesn't happen in a blink of an eye. Okay? It doesn't happen in a blink of an eye that they're just going to leave that friend and that's it. And there has to be some really serious consequence for them to leave that friend and to walk away. And again, these things come from internal. It comes from internally but that takes time to develop. It's not going to happen overnight. So be patient. You have to be patient. But that's okay. I mean, you have to have boundaries. So if they now stayed out with this friend that's not so good until 11 o'clock at night outside, and they didn't call you and they didn't do any of these things, there has to be a consequence. So give the consequence. But at the same time, you have to be patient and you have to be loving and you have to explain and you have to see it from their point of view. It's a mix of all of these things. And it does not happen overnight. That's why I said one of the main criteria is you have to be patient. It takes time. And show unconditional love even when it's hard. Show unconditional love even when it's hard. It is, absolutely.
To show the strength and to hold yourself when.
But love does not mean there's no consequences. There's still consequences.
I don't mean that it's not loving. It's sometimes when we react. So if someone is disrespecting or behaving badly, the way that we react, and for example, saying you have to sit in this corner for the next 5 minutes, it's I am not feeling loving at this point, though I really love them.
So the love has to come in actions too, not just in words. And the consequences does not mean that you don't love them. It just means that you're giving consequences. That's all. When I say withdrawing love, I mean finding a way to break their spirit. So you stop respecting them, you stop loving them, you stop visiting them if you go visit their houses. That's what I mean. If you are breaking somebody's spirit, that means you don't love them. If you're breaking their spirit so that they don't feel encouraged, that's when I'm saying you don't love somebody.